Welcome to Hard Talk. I'm Sarah Montague. My guest today is one of the big names of South Africa's anti-apartheid struggle. Ahmed Kathrada was sentenced to life in prison alongside Nelson Mandela on Robben Island. He spent 26 years of his life locked up. On their release, Nelson Mandela persuaded him to join him in government, an experience he didn't like. But he's never stopped campaigning for the ideals of freedom on which the anti-apartheid movement was based. So has South Africa lived up to those ideals? Ahmed Kathrada, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, when you think back 50 years ago, what were the ideals which you were fighting for?
Well, in one sentence, it was for a non-racial, non-sexist, democratic South Africa.
And that
sums up our whole struggle.
That sums up the whole struggle. But for you, because there were years of what became an incredibly difficult life. I mean, you were arrested, more than 18 times. You spent 26 years of your life in prison. There must have been times at which you thought, this isn't for me, this fight isn't for me.
No, fortunately, there was no such thought at all, because the activities for which we were arrested, we already knew what the consequences could be. Many of our colleagues were hanged. Others were tortured to death. Some were assassinated. So we had an idea of what it could be. Prison was a bonus, because many of our colleagues didn't live to see democracy.
Okay, so you knew the price that you might have to pay. But was there a moment, was there something that happened when you were young, which you felt was such an outrage that you committed your life to it? Or was it just the way of living?
It was an afterthought, because I was born in a little country town, about 200 miles from Johannesburg. When the time came to go to school, I was not admitted into the white school, nor in the black school. There was no Indian school. So at the age of 8, I had to be sent to Johannesburg, which is about 200 miles away, to school. At that age, it's not politics. One starts wondering why I was not admitted into the schools of my friends. Because as children we play, we don't know color.
And you were playing alongside black and white?
Oh, black and white. Our immediate neighbors were white. So as children don't know color. You become friends, you quarrel, you become friends again. So it wasn't politics. It was a young chappie questioning why I could not go to the school of my friends. But coming to Johannesburg, of course, I came face to face with apartheid, raw apartheid, which was not noticeable in the little country town where I was born.
And raw apartheid, in what way? How did it manifest itself?
Well, for instance, for the first time now I saw boards in front of restaurants, hotels, libraries, trams, parks, Europeans only, non-Europeans not allowed. There were even boards that said, non-Europeans and dogs not allowed. Now, that I saw for the first time in Johannesburg, not in the rural area.
When you're living with something like that, I wonder how often you are angry. I mean, is it a constant sense of rage at the injustice?
There was not much room for anger. As I said, the expectation was worse. Before we were brought up for trial, in the most recent trial, the Rivonia trial, there was a law that allowed the police to detain political suspects for 3 months at a time in complete isolation. No visitors allowed, no lawyers, no newspapers, no books. The only visitor one gets are the police. And they come from time to time with one message only: give us this bit of information, or you're going to die, you're going to hang. So you're by yourself, incommunicado, and all the thought in your mind is death, because they drum it into your head. You are going to die unless you give me this bit of information. So one has to steel oneself not to talk, not to answer questions. And fortunately, I managed that. The other fortunate thing is that I was not tortured physically, unlike lots of my friends and colleagues. Some were tortured to death, others survived, some went to Parliament, others are still around.
Now, initially it was non-violent, but there was, around 1960, a number of things happened. There was the Sharpeville massacre, of course, 69 people killed. The ANC were banned, and there was a decision that actually violence should start being used. How did you feel about that?
About
the ANC decision to start using violence, to make it an armed struggle?
I accepted that because, especially after the banning of the ANC and another liberation organization, the Pan-Africanist Congress, the avenues of peaceful protest came to a halt. There was no other way out. And that is when the ANC set up a wing for an armed struggle. But there was never envisaged that there will be a military victory, because the first phase of the armed struggle was recruiting, training recruits in the manufacture and planting of bombs. These bombs were to be planted in these, the targets rather were these places which had this Europeans only, non-Europeans not allowed. But every recruit, and there were cells of 3, they had to take an oath that when bombs are planted, there'll be no injury to human beings.
But there were. It didn't. I mean, the original intention was that it would.
There were a couple of instances.
Over the years, there were numerous bombings, and there were. I mean, at least 63 people died as a result of that.
Yeah, well, there were a few, and if I'm correct, they were done by, we call it MK units. Some of them in violation of their discipline.
Now, you've mentioned the Rivonia trial, which was a very significant moment, significant for any number of reasons. It was the trial at which you and Nelson Mandela and others were sent to Robben Island. But also it was significant because of what was said at the trial, not least by Nelson Mandela himself. And you've said it wasn't a criminal case, it was a political one. That was it was deliberate policy on your part, the group of you standing trial, wasn't it?
Yes, well, we had 4 of the most senior leaders of the ANC among the 8 of us who were tried. And right from the beginning, under their leadership, it was decided that this should be a political trial. We, the accused, together with our lawyers, will turn it into a political trial, not a criminal trial. Mandela, in his 4-hour speech, I think, to court, set the tone of what the defense case would be.
And it was a tone you had all signed up to and all agreed to in advance.
Yes, oh yes.
And this is where he said, this is what I fought for,
Yeah.
hope to achieve, and if need be, I'm prepared to die.
Yeah, that's how he ended his address. And the rest of us, not all of us gave evidence, but those of us who did took the cue from what Mr. Mandela said in starting the defense case. In other words, when you go into the witness box, you proclaim your political beliefs, you don't apologize, you don't ask for mercy, and when there's a death sentence, which was expected until the very last day, there can be no appeal to a higher court. So that's how the whole case was conducted. As I said, Mr. Mandela set the lead, and those of us who gave evidence followed that example.
That trial, and you wrote about it afterwards, you wrote a letter to Sylvia Neame from Robben Island where you were saying it's really sad to see former comrades whom one loved and respected coming one by one into the witness box to give evidence, and what hurts is when these people tell lies, some of them quite unashamedly.
There were a couple who were in fairly senior positions who gave evidence. There were others who gave evidence whose role was very, very minor. In fact, some of them didn't even know that they were carrying out political work. For instance, there were owners of vehicles who were used to smuggle people out of the country. They were told these are football teams going to Botswana. Eventually they also discovered that it was, but they played ball. And some of them were arrested also for that. One of them.
But people betrayed you?
I wouldn't call it betrayed. You know, they were severely tortured. And I don't know if I would have held out under that torture.
Okay. And there is a very tight group of you who are standing trial. I mean, you said after Nelson Mandela's death that you, when Walter Sisulu died, I lost a father and now I have lost a brother. My life is in a void and I don't know who to turn to. And this is as a result of your shared experiences over a lifetime.
Yes, Walter Sisulu played a very special role in my life. As I said, I had to come to Johannesburg at the age of 8. But as the years went by, and I got involved with the Young Communist League and the Indian Youth Congress and so forth, in that capacity I also met people like Walter Sisulu and others. My father, biological father, had died when I was 14. And gradually Walter Sisulu, in fact, I regarded him as my father. I could turn to him for the most personal advice. You mentioned Sylvia Neame. She was white. And when I started the relationship with her, I consulted with Walter Sisulu. And I told him, I've got this association. If we get caught, it can have a negative impact on our struggle, on our organization. That was what I thought. And his response was, we are against all racial laws, including this Immorality Act, Mixed Marriages Act. Just be careful, but if you get caught, we will stand by you.
And one of those members of your family, effectively Nelson Mandela, not in you were with him for years, obviously, in Robben Island, but you shared a cell with him in Pollsmoor when you were after Robben Island. What was that like?
Well, that was for the first time after 18 years on Robben Island, when 5 of us were transferred to Pollsmoor prison. That's the first time we are now in one cell. On Robben Island, of course, all the 18 years we spent there, we were in single cells. Of course, the only time we met and talked was at work, when we did the pick and shovel work at the quarry, lime quarry. That's when we could work together and talk. Once we were locked up, we were not allowed to talk. So, because there were only 5 political prisoners at Pollsmoor, things were relaxed, quite a bit relaxed.
So to be sharing a cell, that was...
We were sharing a cell until, say, we were transferred in 1982. For 3 years we were together in one cell, and then Mr. Mandela was separated from us. Kept at Pollsmoor prison, but away from us. And that is when he started talking to the other side.
Now, when you did eventually get out, he persuaded you to go in government. He offered you a seat, but you turned down a cabinet seat. You did agree to be an advisor, but you didn't like it. And I wonder why, because you have fought your whole life to change South Africa, and here you have an opportunity to do so. What didn't you like about it?
Well, not all of us were aiming to go to Parliament. And I was working in his office, of course, for the 5 years that he was president. At the same time, I was a member of Parliament. For some reason, I just did not like that type of life.
And what you did was to set up the Kathrada Foundation, which...
Yeah, that came much later.
And one of its aims was to campaign for the Freedom Charter, which was a document from 1955, but something which talked about freedom, all people having rights, the people sharing the country's wealth, the land being shared among those who work it, a very radical redistribution of wealth within South Africa, which South Africa is a long way from achieving. But do you think it can? Do you still want it to?
Unlike other colonial countries, our oppressors were not foreigners. They were South Africans. So our policy took that into account, that these are fellow country persons, not a few thousand, but a few million. Our policy had to take that into account, so that if you try to implement everything we've said on the platform and so forth, when you come into government, you're dealing with reality now.
Okay, but in terms of what the government set out to achieve, I mean, at the end of apartheid, almost 90% of the land was owned by whites, who made up less than 10% of the population. The aim was to transfer about 30% of that land to blacks, and so far only 7.5% has been. It's 20 years since apartheid. Is that enough progress?
Again, when we say that most of the land that can be used for agriculture was in white hands. But again, you face the reality, you're not dealing with enemies anymore. And we are not going to do anything foolish by now turning these people against us. We have to work with them. The policy-wise and in practice, we didn't know how to run huge farms. We didn't know how to run industry. We didn't have engineers. On everything, every ministry, we relied on the white civil servant.
When you look at what the senior politicians have done and the criticism that is levelled against them, well, let's take the public protector, Thuli Mandonsela, told Parliament, "All I can say to this nation, this committee, is corruption in this country has reached crisis proportions. There is no two ways about it."
As I say, as an ordinary member of the ANC, I have admiration for the public protector. She's there as a result of government policy. And the public protector, the Constitution itself, the Constitution Court, these are all institutions to protect our democracy.
Well, let's talk about another country where you are campaigning, because you say, "I think of my cramped prison cell and I visualise my fellow freedom fighter Marwan Barghouti and other Palestinian prisoners." And you have campaigned vociferously for his release, because you say that he's in a similar situation, and sometimes arguably a worse situation, than Nelson Mandela.
The ANC policy has always regarded the PLO as a sister organization, as an allied organization. And that's the policy of our government as well. We had close ties with the PLO, although Western countries were not happy with that. When Mr. Mandela came out of prison, he was advised to break ties with Castro, with the PLO. And his response was very simple. To the Western leaders, that when we came to you for assistance, you condemned us as terrorists. It will be ungrateful and immoral of us now to turn our backs on those who supported us.
So is it purely because they supported you? Because you'll know that Alan Butler, whose son, he was injured with his son when a bus was bombed in Jerusalem. He said the media have attempted to portray Marwan Barghouti as some kind of Nelson Mandela. The truth, though, is quite the opposite. Barghouti's never renounced violence and he's never shown any remorse for his prolific terror activities.
Mandela has shown no remorse for what we have done. In fact, we've been proud of what we have done. We can't prescribe to another country how they should run their struggle. My own view is I keep on supporting the Palestinian struggle once they have decided, once the Palestinian leaders have decided this is the route we'll take, I'll support them.
Even if that route
but I'm not going
involves
to prescribe
violence.
to them how they should.
Is their use of violence justified?
If under the well, that's not for me to say. But if they, in their wisdom, resort to violence as the only method, I'll support them. I've been to Palestine. I have seen what it's like. It's the only colony in the world today, the colony of Israel. I have seen in Palestine what didn't exist under apartheid, and the worst days of apartheid.
So your support is unconditional?
My support is wholehearted. I take my cue from what they do. I don't prescribe to them. So far, there is no reason for me to criticize the Palestinian leadership.
But the South African Zionist Federation says Barghouti is not a political prisoner, but a terrorist guilty of multiple crimes against humanity.
I'm not surprised at them. And they have tried to turn well, let me take it as an individual, because I've been outspoken on Palestine. They've been trying to misinterpret us as being anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic. We're not. We are critical of Israel. That does not make us anti-Jewish. Dennis Goldberg is a Jew. So many. There's Ruth Slovo. I grew up with her. She was killed by a bomb. She's Jewish. So I can never be anti-Jewish, and our struggle can never be anti-Jewish.
When you at times think back to what's happened, do you still summon rage? Do you ever feel angry?
I never did. I never felt angry. We came out of prison, and before, our policy was reconciliation. Following from that policy of reconciliation is lack of bitterness, no revenge, no hatred. Policy-wise and in practice, that is the only way we can go out. Because these are negative emotions, hatred, revenge, bitterness. In the end, people harboring those emotions suffer more than people towards whom it is directed. So we don't want to spend our lives with negative emotions. We have to face the reality of the day.
Ahmed Kathrada, thank you for coming on Hard Talk.
Most welcome.